Welcome to Primetime Weekend. I'm Nicole Wallace. Let's get right to the week's top stories.
The former president handpicked 3 members of the United States Supreme Court with the intention they would undo the protections of Roe v. Wade. They did as he intended, and in state after state, laws have been passed criminalizing health care providers. I don't know if anyone here has heard most recently the stories out of Georgia. Tragic story about a young woman who died because it appears the people who should have given her health care were afraid they'd be criminalized after the Dobbs decision came down.
Vice President Kamala Harris earlier today speaking to the National Association of Black Journalists on the threat that Donald Trump represents to all women in America if he were to return to the White House. The vice president there was referencing brand new reporting in ProPublica that found that the abortion bans he put into motion aren't just causing women to needlessly suffer while waiting for treatment or inflicting long-term irreversible damage to their health, rendering them infertile or impacting their ability to have children in the future. We now have irrefutable proof that the bans are killing women. ProPublica found that at least 2 women in Georgia have died after being unable to access timely abortion care after Roe was overturned. Here is one woman's story. Quote, in her final hours, Amber Nicole Thurman suffered from a grave infection that her suburban Atlanta hospital was well equipped to treat. But just that summer, her state had made performing the procedure she needed a felony, with few exceptions. Any doctor who violated the new Georgia law could be prosecuted and face up to a decade in prison. Thurman waited in pain in a hospital bed, worried about what would happen to her 6-year-old son as doctors monitored her infection spreading, her blood pressure sinking, and her organs beginning to fail. It took 20 hours for doctors to finally operate. By then, it was too late. Yesterday should have been Amber's 31st birthday. She's a mom, 31 years old. ProPublica reports that the state medical committee that investigated this case, her case, and others in other states, operate on a 2-year lag on the cases they examine, meaning the cases of women who have died since the Dobbs decision are just now starting to come to light, which means that, according to ProPublica, quote, there are almost certainly others. This inexcusable stain on our country, this tragedy, is part of something once kept deeply hidden from any political discourse. We never knew these stories. And that is the harrowing accounts of women who are or could be our sisters or our daughters, our mothers, or our friends, being denied vital, life-saving health care after Donald Trump's hand-picked Supreme Court justices stripped away the constitutional right to an abortion. And these real-life stories are so raw, so undeniably cruel, so senseless, that Trump's MAGA loyalists are working overtime to change reality, to deflect and distract from the horror that Donald Trump almost single-handedly created. One former Trump staffer, Project 2025 advisor, a guy named John McEntee, has publicly tried to claim that these tragedies aren't happening at all. As we showed you last week, this guy, John McEntee, took to TikTok to claim that stories about women's suffering are made up.
Can someone track down the women Kamala Harris says are bleeding out in parking lots because Roe v. Wade was overturned? Don't hold your breath.
Eating chicken nuggets while being that inhumane is an interesting touch. It seems to have worked. Since we showed you that video on TikTok Friday, it's made its way around the internet, and the comments have been flooded with women sharing stories of being denied vital abortion care. The Independent is reporting that the McEntee video now has more than 17,000 comments, almost all from women sharing their stories of being denied care. Quote, posting stories of being turned away from emergency rooms in agony, bleeding out in parking lots, at home, in public bathrooms, and sometimes for months afterward. Others talk about miscarriages, ectopic pregnancies, losing the ability to have children, and driving across multiple states to get treatment where it is still legal, often while hemorrhaging. Most of the stories appear to involve wanted or planned pregnancies. The deadly reality for women in 2024 in Donald Trump's post-Roe America is where we start the hour with some of our favorite reporters and friends. ProPublica's senior editor, Ziva Brandstetter, is here. She edited that incredible piece of reporting we read from. Also joining us, President of Reproductive Freedom for All, Mini Timuraj, is here, and former Obama White House Policy Director, MSNBC medical contributor, Dr. Kavita Patel is here. You know, Ziva, I wish that guy, what is his name? Johnny McEntee with the fast food fetish. I wish he was right. I actually wish this wasn't real. But tragically it is. Take us through the ProPublica report.
First, thank you for having us on to talk about this important reporting by Kavita Sarana and other journalists at ProPublica. We found that, this is a very real case of a 28-year-old woman who died in a suburban Atlanta hospital from a preventative cause. And, the state committee that is assigned to review these cases found it preventable. There was a simple procedure that could have saved her life, could have stopped the infection growing within her body. And it wasn't performed for 20 hours. We don't know what was in the committee's mind or what was in the doctor's minds, but we do know what the outcome was, Nicole, and that was this 28-year-old woman is dead. She's one of at least 2 women who've died in Georgia in situations that appear related to the ban and that the state committee has found preventable.
Minnie, I don't want to gloss over this one case yet and talk more broadly about our politics, because I think that what Republicans want people to believe is not just that these women don't exist, but that they're a certain kind of woman. Not that they're a mom who may have desperately wanted the baby she was pregnant with. I think it's why Amanda Zarowski is so inconvenient to Republicans. But there's a little boy who lost his mom at 6 because of Donald Trump's criteria for selecting Supreme Court justices, for only wanting people who would overturn Roe. Whatever happens in our politics, nothing undoes that single tragedy for this family and this little boy.
Yeah, look, we knew this was happening. I have a tremendous amount of gratitude to this tough, smart, persistent reporters at ProPublica who finally proved it, right? I mean, we've been collectively gaslit by Republicans for the past 2 years since Dobbs. We've been shouting, women will die, women are likely dying. Now we have the proof. Amber Thurman would be alive today if it wasn't for Donald Trump and Brian Kemp's abortion ban. Brian Kemp signed that bill. Brian Kemp, a governor who has the opportunity with his legislature to move the Reproductive Freedom Act in Georgia to repeal and fix this mess, has shown no indication he's willing to do it. It's important to understand for everybody that there's complicity up and down the policymaking structure, from the Supreme Court to the Fifth Circuit to the Georgia legislature to the Georgia governor's mansion to the White House. They've all conspired and collaborated for women like Amber to die. I cannot say it enough. We did not have to be in this place. We do not have to live like this. We owe it to Amber and the countless number of women whose stories we do not yet know to do something about this.
Dr. Patel, I want to read you more from ProPublica's reporting on how Amber died. Quote, by the time doctors began to operate on Amber, the situation was so dire that doctors started with open abdominal surgery. The OB performed the DNC, but immediately continued with the hysterectomy. During surgery, Thurman's heart stopped. Her mother was praying in the waiting room when one of the doctors approached. "Come walk with me," she said. Her mother recalled her daughter's last words before she was wheeled into surgery. They had made no sense coming from a vibrant young woman who seemed to have her whole life ahead of her. Quote, "Promise me you'll take care of my son." This isn't an account from the 60s. This isn't fiction. This isn't an ad. This is the United States of America, post-Dobbs.
Yeah, Nicole, and it gets even worse. Just again, kudos to ProPublica for bringing this story forward. As Minnie said, we knew these stories were happening. We know this is the tip of the iceberg. And what's troubling, Nicole, is just reading 20 hours. And she was put, just to be clear, this wasn't 20 hours. She came in with no pain, nothing acute. She had an elevated white blood cell count. She had all the signs. In fact, at one point in the documentation, one of the consultants said that she's in septic shock. So this is very clearly doctors who knew what was happening, not just doctors, entire teams. But you can see how much people ask me, Nicole, often, well, won't doctors just do the right thing? At the end of the day, won't they do the right thing? This just shows you how much of an overhang and a shadow. And I just want to give a little perspective. I don't know any of the doctors involved. I know this hospital, but I don't know the doctors. I know probably what the doctors were thinking, and Minnie knows this too. They're thinking, well, if I get arrested and get removed, and I'm the only covering OB for this area, how many other women am I not going to treat? So this is the position that medical professionals have been put in. By the way, just to say something, Amber herself was a medical professional. She was a medical assistant who was going on to learn nursing. So think about all the layers and things she knew that were wrong in order to get her, unfortunately, into not having an orphan child. That's what's even more mind-boggling, Nicole. This is someone who knew the medical system, knew it well enough to go out of state, knew it well enough to know what to say. Even she couldn't get the care she deserved.
I want to come back to the reporting, Ziva. This is from what you report. Amber found out she was pregnant with twins in the summer of 2022. She was already a single parent and preparing to apply to nursing school, so she decided to have an abortion. Georgia's 6-week ban had just gone into effect, however, so she made an appointment for a surgical abortion in North Carolina. She got stuck in traffic due to the long drive and missed the window for a surgical abortion. The clinic couldn't hold her place because they were inundated with women coming from out of state, and so Amber had to rely on the abortion pill regimen. She was a good candidate for the abortion pill and took them as directed. She experienced heavy bleeding. If she'd been in North Carolina, the clinic that saw her originally would have done a DNC for free, but she was too far away. On August 18th, 2022, she vomited blood, passed out, and her boyfriend called 911. At the hospital, she presented with clear, unmistakable signs of sepsis. And as Dr. Patel just said, it took doctors 20 hours to operate. Her heart stopped on the operating table, and she died. What will happen now to all of these facts that are not disputed?
Well, that's a really good question, isn't it? I mean, one of the interesting things we've found is that these findings are never shared with families. Amber's family learned that her death had been deemed preventable from ProPublica. You know, I know that this board takes its investigation seriously. It reviewed her medical records and deemed this preventable. It said that her death was largely largely caused by this delay, this 20-hour delay. Again, we don't know what was in doctors' minds. They did discuss a DNC several times. You know, we're very interested in knowing more. Kavitha Sarana would love to hear from people who know more. We want the entire story to come out. You know, it's really up to the public and to elected officials there in Georgia to determine how to handle this. Brian Kemp, you know, his office, Governor Kemp, said that ProPublica was engaging in fear-mongering when we reached out about this story. And that's the same words they used 2 weeks before Amber died, when advocates who were trying to stop Georgia's 6-week abortion ban said women would suffer and possibly die because of this 6-week ban. So they're consistent in their, you know, in their reactions to these warnings and now this confirmed case from their own board.
Ziva, tell me more about Kemp thinking this is fear-mongering. What part do you think was fear-mongering? Amber dying or the facts of how she died coming out?
You know, I can only assume that they think talking about this case is somehow, making some leap on our part. I mean, I don't know what else elected officials like Governor Kemp need to know. We're presenting the facts as the state board presented the facts, and the fear mongering should be looked at as something that is being overblown. And this is again a woman who has died, one of two at least, and obviously we think that that high cost of life is very important and not fear mongering.
Up next for us, Donald Trump again vilifying the legal immigrants in the small community of Springfield, Ohio, suggesting when he visits there, he may not make it out safely. Why would that be? We'll talk to reporters on the ground on how his dangerous lies are the thing making the community unsafe for the people who live there. That story is next.
I'm going to go there in the next 2 weeks. I'm going to Springfield and I'm going to Aurora. You may never see me again, but that's okay. Got to do what I got to do. Whatever happened to Trump? Well, he never got out of Springfield.
The mystery in that clip to me is why are they clapping, right? It's unclear what any of that was. I think I know. But the ex-president is undoubtedly adding fuel to the fire for the people who live and work and have to try to survive and raise their families in Springfield, Ohio, by talking about planning a visit that the Republican mayor warns would be a, quote, extreme strain on the city resources. Trump continues to ignore calls from local and state officials in his own party to stop fanning the flames of this baseless, debunked, racist conspiracy theory about people who live there eating the family pets. To that point, his MAGA allies are now descending on Springfield, where, remember this guy, Vivek Ramaswamy, is hosting what he calls an immigration town hall there later today. The city itself is reeling from the recklessness of these lies. Our next guest reports that Clark County Democratic Party volunteers are now facing threats from far-right groups while canvassing for the election. And in response to the bomb threats at the schools in Springfield are telling students to be careful of false information, while state troopers sweep the school buildings twice a day. Joining our conversation, NBC News correspondent Shaq Brewster out in Springfield, Ohio, and lifelong Ohioan and managing editor of WYSO, Southwest Ohio's community-owned radio station. Chris Welter is here with us. Alicia is still here as well. Chris, tell me what it's like there.
Well, it's been pretty hectic the last week. This is a community that has faced a lot of challenges for years and years. And, the Haitian Americans here have been a part of that community for, the last 5 years. And, they've been creating businesses. They've been, working jobs. They've been going to school. They've become a part of the community. And so really right now things are just tense. There's a sense of anxiety in the air. There continue to be bomb threats every day. We're going on 6 or 7 days in a row. Like you said earlier, Governor DeWine and Mayor Rue, resources are stretched thin. The Ohio State Troopers have been called into the city to kind of help keep the schools secure. But, when I was on Tuesday, when I was sitting in the parking lot of one of the schools, there were parents running into the schools to pick up their kids after they heard about a new rumor of a threat on Facebook. So everyone's just really on edge. And there's just a lot of uncertainty about what's going to come next.
Do people feel, do they understand why they're in the middle of the presidential race with 50 days to go? Do they understand that the lie, that people like you, people have done the work to debunk the lie, that nobody that follows the truth believes that anyone's Labrador retriever is at risk? I mean, has it shattered their feeling that they're welcome in this country?
I think it depends on the person. I've been able to speak with a lot of Haitian American folks over the last week, but I've been reporting on this issue since 2020. It's not even an issue. I've just been reporting on the reality that Haitian Americans are moving to our area, and kind of what they're dealing with, and both the challenges and the successes they've had. So there are some folks that have talked about moving back to Florida. I think there's a real misconception that these people are illegal immigrants or illegal aliens. They're not. The vast majority are transplants, people that lived in Florida or Long Island and decided to move to Springfield, Ohio because of a cheaper cost of living and an opportunity to start their own businesses here. So some folks are talking about moving back to places where there's a larger Haitian American community, but other folks are talking about sticking it out and being resilient, and they that this too will pass, because a lot of people have started businesses, they've started families here. So it's they don't want to leave, right? They care about this community. They care about Springfield.
I mean, what's amazing, Alicia, is that they're neither of those things, right? But that is what Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are calling them.
And J.D. Vance knows better. He knows that whether
they're his constituents.
They're his constituents. He knows what temporary protected status is. He understands. But I want to take us to a moment in the debate where Donald Trump was talking about how he was spreading a lie that immigrants are coming and stealing jobs, and says, you know who it's the worst for? Black Americans and Hispanic Americans. He was trying to drive a wedge between those of us who are here with paperwork and those of us who are not. And I think part of what Springfield has illustrated so sadly is that once that lie is out there, it attaches to all of us, right? To be anti-Haitian is to be anti-Black. To be anti-Latinos at the border is to be anti-Latinos at the interior of this country, which they're doubling down on by saying they want to deport 11 million people who are living on the interior of this country. So if he's trying to call to you and say, don't worry, you will be protected, you will be special, you will be different because you have paperwork, they are now saying, that is not true. Temporary protected status, J.D. Vance is still calling you an illegal alien. They see no distinction between people who are here without papers and people who are.
Shaq, I want to play some of your great interviews since you've been on the ground there. Let me do that first.
So it was a very terrifying feeling, but I was also enraged because I know that a lot of it is rooted in lies against a community that has shown me a lot of love.
All this activity with the bombing threats and stuff, I mean, it has a little bit of an impact on the kids. They're kind of scared.
What's going on right now is really chaotic and hectic. Everybody has the right to live in peace, and this is just disrupting our peace. And these people are nice people. They're good people.
Shaq Brewster, you're on the ground there for us. Tell us what you're hearing.
Yeah, Nicole, I think one of those conversations that our team had with parents who were dropping their kids off to elementary school, one of the elementary schools that was evacuated last week because of that hoax threat. One of the parents said he didn't know how to explain a bomb threat to his 6-year-old, and he tried to sanitize it a little bit and tried to still explain. And the 6-year-old started crying to him, wanting to go to school, but also just scared and fearful of going to school. And that's the word I continue to hear in the conversations I've been having with people. Folks are fearful. Folks are scared about the reality. Of course, it's the threats that we've been talking about, the bomb threats that have targeted elementary schools, high schools, campuses. Yesterday, it was a grocery store and a Walmart. But it's also the fear that something else could happen because you continue to hear this rhetoric. You continue to hear these false, these debunked and nasty claims continue to be made. I spoke to the manager of a Creole restaurant in town, and he told me that people are still calling up his restaurant and saying, hey, what's the cat special today? Are you still serving that dog that I'm hearing about? Just hateful calls that he's dealing with. And as he's dealing with that, he's also dealing with members of his community, other immigrants, fearful of their reality, fearing that not only they can face a threat just existing in Springfield, but fearing if Donald Trump is elected and that temporary protected status, that is what is keeping them in a legal status here, a legal immigration status here in Ohio, if that is revoked, what that means for them when they have purchased homes, when they have started businesses. So there's a lot of fear that you're hearing on the ground, and it's fear based on very different things, but all rooted, it seems, from that lie.
Not only do my kids serve as a permanent reminder of what's important, they also keep me humble. You can walk into a room like this where people cheer when you step onto the stage, and you might think for a second that you're kind of special. Then you go home and your kids remind you very quickly you're actually not that big of a deal. And ours are pretty good at it. So my kids keep me humble. Unfortunately, Kamala Harris doesn't have anything keeping her humble.
That is who she is. That was Sarah Huckabee Sanders displaying the casual ugliness of the attacks on Vice President Kamala Harris, which frankly never ceased to take your breath away. She's the governor of Arkansas now, and she used her platform, privilege of being an elected official, to attack not just Vice President Kamala Harris as not being humble, but to say that the reason she's not humble is because she didn't give birth, that she doesn't have biological children. Despite the fact that she is a parent, she's a parent to Cole and Ella Emhoff. Just ask them. Now, that kind of casual cruelty is a hallmark. It's what you would expect from Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who has championed repealing child labor protections as the governor of Arkansas, who has defended Trump's family separation policy as, quote, very biblical, whatever very means in that context, when she was the White House press secretary. But it also reflects a broader brand of cruelty of the Republican Party, which seems intent on alienating voters with modern families or blended families or people without children and all those childless cat ladies in pursuit of levying these attacks at Vice President Harris. Doug Emhoff's ex-wife, Kirsten Emhoff, leapt to the defense of the vice president, the woman Kirsten calls her co-parent. She wrote this on social media, quote, Cole and Ella keep us inspired to make the world a better place. I do it through storytelling. Kamala Harris has spent her entire career working for the people, all families. That keeps you pretty humble. Joining our conversation, former Assistant U.S. Attorney and President of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, Maya Wiley. Also joining us, host of the Fast Politics podcast, special correspondent for Vanity Fair, Molly Jong-Fast is here. So a line has to be drawn around picking and choosing which families are the right families. And this attack on modern families, which I think make up the majority of the families that people are in or have made, it must be working somewhere for someone, but you would think those are the kind of voters that would have locked up by now. This is a sign of political desperation to me.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Nicole, because I find this so offensive. If you can't confront your opposing candidate on policy, you attack them personally. And you attack a woman like Kamala Harris. And I'm going to tell you a personal story of when I first had contact with Kamala Harris as a sitting senator. I was a professor at the New School. I was a senior vice president there. And I had been asked by the New School to deliver the convocation to the entering first-year class. And I did so. And my convocation speech was about how we be a we and not an us-them. Mm-hmm. I come off the stage and I get a text. And the text is from Senator Kamala Harris, who I have not met. I know her sister well, so I assume that's how she got my cell phone number. And she said, that was fantastic. That was a great job. She was there for her stepchild's first day of college. Tell me what a parent is. And I will tell you, it's the person who shows up because it's the right thing to do for the person you want to support, whether you gave birth to that child or not. It's the person who says, you know, I'm going to care and understand, even if I have not had a child biologically, that childcare costs are a top expense that families are facing. And you know what? If you're a child care provider, you're probably earning $27,000 a year. And in most major cities, that's your rent. And you're probably a mother yourself. And saying, what can I do as a leader about that? And she didn't have to have biological children to do it. And to your point, so many of us have people we love who we did not give birth to as women, who we care about and who we will show up for and we will vote for. And that includes the young women we hope can live and survive an unexpected pregnancy and make a choice for themselves. And if they've sewn up a Christian nationalist extremist base, so if you can't come up with a way to express compassion for others, all you can do is cling to your extremism.
And, you know, to that point, it is a line that runs through it, right? And sometimes they don't seem connected, but J.D. Vance saying in an interview that women should stay in marriages even if they're violent. And Sarah Huckabee Sanders saying that Kamala Harris couldn't be humble because she doesn't have kids. She does have kids. They're a piece. And at some point, it stops being about their ugliness, and it stops being about them, and it becomes about us. This isn't just offensive to women who hear that and view it as some deliberate attempt at otherness. It's offensive to men. It's offensive to anyone. It's offensive to a step kid. I mean, it is the kind of intolerance that at some point stops being about MAGA and starts being about the rest of us. And what are we going to do in response?
Yeah, I mean, I would also say it's this very narrow vision of what a woman is, right? Of what you can be in this world, right? You have to have biological children. And that, I think, is very anti-feminist, right? That you have to be a certain way in order to be a woman. I would also add that it's a little bit ironic because this is the party that's made it less safe to be pregnant, that refuses to codify IVF, that, you know, refuses, I mean, these, you know, they're against sort of like the care economy, which Harris talks so much about, right? They are not for early childhood stuff. They've, you know, a lot of these Republican governors have rejected federal funding for, you know, meals for school kids. So they really are very, I mean, I'm not going to call the entire party this, but it certainly seems very anti-family, and yet you're telling us that for women to be women, they must have biological children.
When we come back, it's the final word on the myth of Donald Trump, the self-made bazillionaire. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalists Sue Craig and Russ Buettner are the authors of a brand new book, perfectly titled Lucky Loser: How Donald Trump Squandered His Father's Fortune and Created the Illusion of Success. They'll join us next.
If you lost your fortune today, what would you do tomorrow?
Maybe I'd run for president. I don't know.
You mean you think you have to be bankrupt with not a dime in your pocket in order to be a good president?
No, I'm only kidding. You know, when I say that, of course, I'm being somewhat facetious. But I have to tell you, a lot of people would vote for you if you were in that position because they'd feel sorry for you.
Every glimpse into his mind, right? That was Trump 44 years ago, giving us that glimpse into what he really thinks of the presidency, the highest office in the land. Years later, his political rise was propelled by the belief among his supporters that he was a wealthy and successful businessman. Our next guest, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalists Suzanne Craig and Russ Buettner, have spent years puncturing that myth with their meticulous reporting. They are out with a brand new book today called Lucky Loser, with the best cover I've seen in many, many years. The title is Lucky Loser: How Donald Trump Trump squandered his father's fortune and created the illusion of success. In it, they peel the curtain back inch by inch, not just on Trump's business failures that were funded by his father, but also on how his guiding principle of fake it until you make it has shaped his entire public life and public image. They write this, quote, Donald Trump came to be imbued with a host of attributes that speak to how we confer admiration and status in modern America, our awe of celebrity, our tendency to conflate the trappings of wealth with expertise and ability. That is the real work of this book. It is a story about Donald Trump, his family, his wealth, his failures, but it is also a story about this country and how we've arrived at a moment when Donald Trump is a leading candidate for president for the third time. Suzanne Craig and Russ Buettner join us now. You guys have contributed so much to what we understand about the things Trump cares about most. I mean, he's been under investigation almost since the beginning for potential ties to Russia, for trying to overturn his defeat in 2020, but the reporting that gets under his skin more than any other is the reporting you do on the mirage that is his image of a successful businessman. Talk about the story you tell.
Well, it's incredible how much it does get under his skin, and this book really tries to step back and tell the definitive story through a narrative, starting with his father and the relationship with his father and then his business career. And we just go through these decades. And what you find is, and we start with Fred Trump, and he's an outer borough builder, incredibly successful. And we go through the family struggle that landed, that Donald ended up running the Trump Organization. And then we really sort of start on Donald's business career and this early time in his life in the 70s when he's in his 20s. And he's already claiming in New York to be worth a couple $100 million. He's giving interviews to the New York Times where he's like, I'm worth $200 million, and soon that became $1 billion. And he was appropriating his father's wealth. You know, he had inherited hundreds of millions of dollars from his father. And he gets a second down the road, more money from The Apprentice. But just the idea of his father and this relationship and how his father bankrolled him for years, and just his unwillingness to accept it. It's almost like he doesn't believe it himself that it happened. And it sort of became, in our reporting when we talk about it, the original lie inside of him. He's called his father a small-time guy. He has said, he got a small loan from him. In fact, nothing, it's just wrong. It's a lie. He got hundreds of millions of dollars from him, and he is who he is today because of it. And we also look at the ups and downs of that, because he gets this large inheritance from his father, ultimately, in addition to connections and everything else. And then this second rush of money, almost a second inheritance from The Apprentice, and the book goes into a lot of detail about that. And then the loser part of it is sort of how he lost a lot of it along the way in these businesses that were just not making money.
What is, the idea that he squandered his father's wealth, I think the first long piece of journalism about his finances reveals that. And that was such a shock to him when it was made public. It's one of the sort of lies that he's fought the hardest to keep in place, seemingly for his political purposes. But the book makes it deeper than that, that the mirage is about wealth and of sustaining the inherited wealth seem to be tied into everything about the Trumps.
That's really interesting. That's a good observation. I definitely think that wealth was the currency of that family. But I think also that we saw this huge windfall that came to him that made his first rise possible. And then we saw this, through our later reporting at the Times, this second windfall from The Apprentice. But we really wanted to connect that, and that's sort of the work of this book. And when you look through that, what you see is this incredible cycle where these huge pots of money arrive, absence of any business expertise. And then he uses that to try to look like a successful businessman. So he tries to build something new. He tries to build a huge tower in Chicago. He tries to build the world's tallest building on the west side of Manhattan. He tries tries to renovate, and he does, the old post office in Washington, D.C. into a hotel. But those businesses regularly require influxes of money from those giant pots of lucky money that came his way. And there are currents that run through that of him making the same mistakes over and over again, chiefly that he believes he can spend anything to create one of these businesses because his name on it will make the revenue match whatever he spends. And his life is sort of an object lesson in proving that thesis wrong.
I mean, but what the natural extension is that the presidency, it isn't, I think there's this mythology, right, that the businesses and the image of a businessman fuels the presidency. What you're left with is that the presidency is part of this project as well, fueling the names on the building and the perception of the businesses.
That's really interesting. I think that's true. I think he also believes that he is genetically superior to other people, and that right, and that his judgment. There's a real turning point in his life in 1985. He has his first flush of success with Trump Tower and with renovating a hotel in Manhattan. He's done those with other partners and with his father's support and under the watchful eye of far more experienced people and a small crew working for him. And he suddenly believes he can do anything at that point in time. And he proposes this huge project on the West Side with the tallest building in the world and 7 other 76-story skyscrapers around it. He buys a football team and tells that whole league that he's going to produce the networks and they'll stop covering the NFL. They'll cover this upstart football league. He spends more money on a casino in Atlantic City than anybody ever has. He buys an airline shuttle, and it all just goes bad within about 6 years. But he just becomes increasingly calcified in that notion that what we talked to a lot of people that worked for him then is they said he just didn't listen anymore. He didn't want to hear what experts said. He didn't want to hear that the numbers didn't work. He believed he knew best. And you really see that trait become more calcified as he gets to the presidency. So you're right, it really is a preamble to sort of who he is in the White House.
This has been Primetime Weekend. I'm Nicole Wallace. Please tune into Deadline White House and all of our primetime shows weekdays on MSNBC.